What it means is going to send a signal to the industry that the market for industrial hemp, in particular related to building, is going to accelerate.
That's Henry Gage Jr., the newly appointed president of the Us Hemp Building Association. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today we're going to meet the new leadership team at the Us Hba. First, we'll talk to Henry Gage about his new role as president. We'll hear about his background in engineering and green building, and we'll also talk about the International Code Council's determination for hempcrete and what that's going to mean for the building industry. Then we'll talk to Ryan Doherty, the newly appointed vice president at the Us Hemp Building Association. But first, we will take a quick sponsor break, and then we'll come back with a few nuggets of hemp news. This episode is brought to you in part by Regenerative, a full-service hemp building material installer. Committed to being mindful of environmental impacts and supporting local economies, Regenerative is the leading U.S. hempcrete installer, specializing in the eReasy spray-applied system. Find out how Regenerative can make your hempcrete dreams come true at regenerative.com. This episode is brought to you in part by All Walks Small Animal Hemp Bedding. All Walks is a lifestyle pet brand created by I&D Hemp to bring high-quality, sustainable hemp pet products to the pet store. Launched in March of 2022 at the Global Pet Expo with a third-place new product award, All Walks is now available on Amazon and is coming to a pet store near you soon. So ask your local pet stores to carry All Walks Hemp Bedding. You can learn more at allwalkspet.com. All Walks, hemp goods for a better path. Okay, welcome back. Just got a couple of news nuggets for you here this week. Today is actually September 9th, 2022, if you're keeping track of that stuff. This first story comes from the Texas Tribune. The headline reads, "Hemp was supposed to save Texas farmers during a drought. It hasn't yet." The story starts like this. When the Texas legislature legalized hemp in 2019, State Senator Charles Perry called hemp the hot crop, a drought-resistant lifeline for farmers. It got by the Senate and the House with unanimous votes. It had the backing of Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller. But since its legalization, farmers have lost interest in hemp, the story says, especially the kind grown for fiber and grain to make clothes, textiles, and paper. Those who invested have yet to see returns and say hemp, like other crops, is struggling across the state during one of the driest years on record. Farmers across Texas are having to cut their losses by abandoning failing crops to save valuable resources. And with so much at stake, some farmers aren't willing to risk investing in hemp. The interest is not there with farmers, said Kyle Bingham, the president of Texas Hemp Growers Association. They do not want to waste time, money, land, or anything on hemp right now. And as hemp production struggles to take off, farmers are still straining to make profits, hitting rural communities that depend greatly on the agriculture industry. All right, so there's a lot more to this story, and I'll put the link for it on lancasterfarming.com. I will say that I've heard from a few folks who are investing in hemp in Texas, especially in fiber hemp and in fiber processing in Texas. So I don't know, I think this story might be a little premature. All right, this next story is on Canna Tech Today, and it says that Estonia is now allowing farmers to grow hemp with higher THC. The story says that a regulatory amendment is now being drawn up by the Estonian Ministry of Social Affairs to allow hemp with higher THC limits to be cultivated in the country. In a major advance for the European hemp industry, Estonian regulators are planning to allow hemp farmers to grow crops with a THC level higher than the current 0.2%. By 2023, that limit will be at least 0.3%. This, in turn, will bring the country up to regional standards created by the EU last year. The change will require an amendment to the country's narcotic drug schedule. This new liberalized policy, however, is not a move to legalize recreational cannabis, but rather is being touted as a way to help domestic hemp farmers who have repeatedly complained about their limited cultivation options under the current regulations. Currently, there are only 2 varieties of hemp that can be legally grown in Estonia. The proposed regulatory update would allow between 3 and 5 new varieties of hemp to be cultivated. So I think this is so fascinating that Europe, they have a lower THC limit than the US does, and ours is incredibly low at 0.3%. Anyway, I'll have links to these 2 stories on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com. And now let's go talk to the new leadership team at the Us Hemp Building Association. First, we'll hear from Henry Gage Jr., and then we'll talk to Ryan Doherty. All right, here we go. Henry Gage, president of the U.S. Hemp Building Association. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am well. How are you today?
Oh, I'm hanging in there, doing okay. So congratulations on your new position at the Us Hba. That's awesome.
Thank you.
We'll get into that in a bit, but I wonder if you could first just introduce yourself.
Sure. Henry Gage Jr. lived in Kingston, New York, transplant from California, raised 2 kids, they both through college, a family guy at heart, moved to the East Coast back around 2014. Sally and I came out. She's the lady of the house. She's my lady. And we basically decided after doing community work in Jersey City that it was time to get involved with the green economy for the benefit of the people. So at the time I was working with Jersey City Anti-Violence Coalition Movement, Executive Director Pam Johnson and other leaders like Sandra Lovely and Educational Gilmore. And we realized that there was a need for us to get into housing and also understand the green economy. So since my background is engineering and I've worked as an analyst and solved problems for big banks and brokerages. For example, one of the algorithms that I wrote is used by a company out of Europe, SimCorp. And I've done work with the leading brands in the market like Gameskeeper and done work in the back office of major brands like Morgan Stanley, helping them do, I guess, a heart-lung replacement on the back office system while keeping the front office working. So I've had a lot of experience with complex systems, and this to me is like a complex puzzle that's worthy of analysis. And so I basically am taking on like that as an analyst. And I have to tell you, I'm having such a good time.
Cool. Well, how did you, so you mentioned, getting into the green economy. How did you then get into industrial hemp and hempcrete? So
I was reading and realized that hemp could be used as insulation, and that would be the greenest form of fixing a building. And so I thought, well, this is probably a great way of combining both. And so heading down that path, the first choice, we were living in Jersey at the time, Jersey City, decided to explore upstate New York because we'd been to Woodstock before and we knew the area. And we realized that if we wanted to do the work, rather than talking about it, we wanted to actually do it. And part of this is based on an experience we had. So we know Cameron McIntosh. We were researching and understanding, well, how do we go about this? And our approach is you try to find the industry leader and talk with them and get their opinion. And so you get to what I would call the cutting edge. And so in technology, there's a lesson that basically goes like this. When you're on the cutting edge, remember to stay behind the blade. And the idea is, let's see who's out there in the cutting edge, and then applying a scientific method, which is basically talk to a few people on the cutting edge, then, do what you think the average is and make your scientific decision of what you think is best. That's the detail of it. Now, what we end up doing is saying we need a property that we can modify. The ones in Jersey City were too expensive, and we didn't want to do it with the community yet because we didn't have the experience. So with that said, and plus it was difficult working with contractors, asking them to share a risk, something that they knew nothing about. Since I've been involved with construction before, I said to myself, when I figure it out, I'll go do it. Build a team, we'll figure it out. And that led to searching in upstate New York, finding an amazing scenario in Kingston. At the time, I didn't know it was the original capital of state. Um, I didn't realize that downtown Kingston is a place where a good portion of the Constitution was written, an area called Four Corners, in the Stockade district of Kingston. And I didn't realize,
Oh, wow.
I say it in the positive voice, there's amazing infrastructure. And what I mean by that is um, the Hudson River is almost like a lake, when we get to that part of the river. So it's a huge, beautiful river. Um, and there are tributaries. The background of the community is there were lime kilns. The housing, some of it was built based on support from IBM, which went out of business. So there are warehouses. There's a history of sheet metal fabrication, metalworking, craftsmanship. So seeing all that, I thought, wow, this is an amazing place. We're fortunate to find a house that was in terrible shape to test the model. And that's how we got up here.
Okay. And so tell me about that house. What, you found a house that needed to be rebuilt? And
Yeah,
so what, did you strip it down to studs and make it into a hemp house?
exactly. So the property was abandoned. It had critters living in it, and it was impossible to live in during wintertime because it's so cold outside. It gets down to freezing up here, and in the walls. There's an old school version of insulation, which is like a laminated paper that you'll find in the wall. In the floors, you'll find paper to stop the air from flowing between the floorboards because there are a couple layers of flooring. No original subfloor. There was the first floor put in, but not like modern construction where you have a sheet of plywood. It's basically probably hickory wood at the first level, et cetera, maybe oak at another level. So the wood in the house is amazing, but no insulation for the most part. The house is from around the 1850s. The reason we know that is because when we're working on the kitchen, cutting up floorboards to do work, we would pull out newspapers you could still read from the 1800s.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's
So
cool.
to answer your other part of the question, yes, we gutted the house from the inside. So from the outside, you cannot tell. It stayed the same. So it's basically timber siding, and then over time, it had been covered over with aluminum siding. And so when people think about replacing siding, it's important to know the structural design of your house. This has been described as like a balloon framed house. So you want to be a little careful taking siding off of a house like that because the siding sometimes can be part of the structural member because the siding itself, in some cases, will appear as like inches thick.
Right, right. So when did you start this?
So we started in 2019. We had Cameron come down from PA. It was before he started Spray Applied. It turns out we were his first customer.
Oh, and you did the cast in place.
We did cast in place.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But it was excellent because he came in town, invited Jeff to come over and some other people to just kind of witness it over at Seed Song Farm, led by Executive Director Creek. And that was like a kickoff for the community to just get an introduction to hempcrete. And we didn't charge anything. We just let people see it. And then, by the way, that's not a sustainable model, free, just so you know. So then from there, what we said is after the initial overview, so he presented some basic facts, he brought a hempcrete block, et cetera, gave a little on the history. I think we spent about 2 hours, some coffee and talk conversation. It was excellent.
Yeah.
And then from there, we went to the house and we started the first mix and install. So it was helpful because by working with someone who's done it before, you can get the best practices. And so, like Sally was showing me an article this morning about a project where someone had a fail where the wall changed colors and this and that. It said that they used only lime and something else. And I looked at where it was relative to the foundation. I thought, I don't even want to respond to it because it's a whole conversation that leads to zero. Now, it might be helpful for them, but then that's like personal education at a high price because there's a nation of people that are ready to follow best practice instructions and get it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So my recommendation is that if people are looking at doing something like this, join the US Hba, join a committee, get to know people in your community, practice, maybe working with the team, helping someone, then they can come and help you get it right the first time.
All right. Well, yeah, talk about how you got involved with the US Hba.
Interesting story. So Cameron and I became friends fast. He's such a great guy. So open and cares about the community. And he said, Henry, you should consider looking into US Hba and joining. I said, okay, I'll look into it. But see, money was low, right? Because what happens when you do community service work, right, at the level that I know some people do, you don't keep those jobs, those good jobs in the city. Because at some point you've got to figure out, well, what do you really want to build? Because see, the problems I've often had is you work for these big companies and you give them your best, but then they like fire people. It's like, oh, great job. The system's working. The rest of you, you're fired. Oh, by the way, you're a consultant. We're finished. Your contract's over.
Yikes.
And then I see people like that in the community, either in New York City or in Jersey or someplace else. And they'd say they're unemployed. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? So what they would do with the profits is they would lay off people and rake it in their pockets, right? Across the board. Now, when you see that enough, for me, in particular as a member of the BIPOC community, my concern is people. And what people of other cultures may not fully appreciate is that when people of color do well, quite often everyone does well, because quite often people I know are concerned about democracy. So I'll tell you a short side story. I remember back during an election and they were talking about Barack Obama. Now, I'm not saying I agree with all of his policy. I'm just telling a story, right? I did vote for him twice. Full disclosure. And so I was listening to a PBS conversation, and this European American lady called and she said, I'm scared. He says, well, what do you mean you're scared? The election is in such and such a month. I'm afraid of what they're going to do to me. And I was thinking, what is she talking about? And he said, well, please explain yourself. I'm afraid that they're going to have me step off the sidewalk the way we did to them. That has always stayed with me because those are the kinds of stories that I hear out of ignorance. And so I looked at Sally and I said, this lady has no idea what she's talking about because my friends never talk about that. It's not even a thought. Their eyes are on the future. They're on jobs, family, community, having fun, period. So that thought never crossed anyone's mind.
Sure.
So recognizing that, I think there's a big misconception because of fear mongers that are out there that divide us one from another. I'll tell you another related story that's recent. So I was over at the station in Woodstock. So that's the place we can talk about later. That poster back there on the wall. Liberate hemp. So that's a big initiative we're working on here to push things forward. Because keep in mind, yes, I'm president, but I had a life before president. The presidency came along within the last, couple weeks. Now, what we talked about, one was a young man, European American brother, another a heavy-set European American brother. And we were standing around the pool table talking about the American flag and the baloney in the atmosphere. And he said, what I really don't like is that like they've even taken the flag and they made it sound like something. So now if I carry the flag, people look at me and they think I support this foolishness in DC. And the other guy said, yeah, same here. I go through that. It seems like they stole it. And I said, you know what? You guys are absolutely right, because what we're going to have to do is take back our flag and define what it means. And I said, the best way we can do that is demonstrating community and demonstrating democracy. And we kind of left it there. They had to go, I had to go, but they agreed that they're going to be at the Liberate Hemp event at Woodstock at the historic Tinker Street Curio and Bar at 101 Tinker Street. It's in Woodstock on October 8th. And so the idea, we can get into more of that later, is to gather community together to continue a consensus process so we make a decision as a community. We can come back to that later.
Cool. Okay. I guess we were talking about how you got into the Us Hba and Cameron brought you in. And then tell me about some of the work you did before you became president.
So part of it was a transition time for the Us Hba. Because at the time, I hadn't realized some of the turmoil that was in process of changing over the board. So this was like a new board structure also. And so I came in, I thought, okay, great, new board structure. I'll sit in my seat. I'll do my part. My focus was based on what I said in my video. So I live in Kingston, New York, but I travel out to the West Coast. I have family there. So I went to school at San Jose State, studied electrical engineering there. I was, president of Black Students of Engineering, all that kind of stuff. Member, vice president, IEEE, et cetera. Now, I guess a challenge we would tend to run into is how do you govern an organization, what's your policy procedures, et cetera, et cetera. And since I had some not-for-profit experience already, what I realized is that I wasn't confident that well, let me say it in the positive voice. I saw opportunities for us to increase efficiency. So while watching kind of that and trying to figure out what do we do to become more efficient, I would do small things like, listen, we trust each other. If you think you need to do this, go do it. If it's wrong, we'll tell you, we can claw it back, but we have to trust each other to make decisions so we can move quickly. Because otherwise, depending on what's said, you can paralyze a board and they look, back and forth to figure out how to make decisions. So we got through all that. And at the same time, the primary objective that I was brought on board for was as certification director. Now, it turns out that was an ideal fit because I have a prior experience working in certifications for corporations. So without going through all the details, yes, I did work at Underwriters Laboratory. Yes, I did work for Cisco Systems. Yes, I did get the first voice over IP approval in Europe, all that kind of stuff. Now, I understand the process of certifications and how that works. It's based on science. We basically spent a good amount of time gathering together the core pieces of data that we wanted to present. We ended up with at least 10 individuals that were involved with the presentation, where we all went to Rochester to represent. And when we finished our presentation, what they literally said, first, let me say, when we walked up to the mic, they looked at us and said, there better not be any duplication. Now, in fairness, this is Saturday at the end of a week of code hearings. Day after day, presentation after presentation. I appreciate the work they're doing, and I know they're tired. So to hear people say the same thing over and over again isn't fair to them. Fortunately, we had rehearsed and planned our part. Mine was the last part. Sally's was second to last. She talked, I'll go to my part. So during my part, I basically focused in on the idea that there are problems in the industry that need to be solved. To solve these problems, we need new materials. Approval of Appendix AY will send a signal to the market that hempcrete is moving from a cottage industry into the mainstream. Now, it turns out that they agreed. And it was kind of funny because afterwards we were talking about it. I said, what was fascinating about that? Did you get the name of the person that motioned to approve it? I said, yeah. What was it? That it was John. Interesting. I said, well, do you see what our proposal number is? Yes, it's 316. And I thought, oh, funny. We kind of had a chuckle over that, right? So for me, it's almost like a little spiritual element, there also. I'm not saying there's only one way of looking at things. That's a way of looking at it. But that whole experience was an epic success, given the context of where we were. So we're now at a point.
Can I stop you there a second?
Sure.
Can you just remind listeners what John 3:16 is all about?
Oh, let's see if I can remember those words. So I think it's, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I have to go back and double check to see that the concept of that is that there is a spiritual element to our life. One culture has interpreted it this way, because if you look at other culture, you'll see other interpretations of that, the Trinity story, which raises questions in my mind also. Because if you look at what's going on in DC and you saw it with your own eyes, but then you hear the lies that shows up in the media and text, you got to be a little careful how much you believe what you read, right? So that's what I go through as an African American, right? It's like, okay, so you want me to put a needle in my arm, huh? Last time that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, I hear that. All right, well, thanks for explaining John 3:16. So back to your story.
Yep. So where that led us to is we left as soon as they had motioned to recommend for approval.
And this is the ICC. This is the International Code Council.
Big one.
Yeah,
it's a big one. They're up on a dais. They're like 10 judges, building experts, the tops of the industry. They ask good questions for good reason because it's building safety. Now, keep in mind, the approach we took was based on insulation, not structural. So that kind of made it a little easier. And we landed on that because of the guidance of Martin. He was a primary consultant. You can actually look at the proposal on the Us Hba website and see all the proponents. So we got through that. We left. We celebrated. We returned home to continue our regular work. Then my job was to keep rallying the troops, monitor for public comments, and look for this period in time to see what happened. Now, it turns out that there was no pushback, no significant, I don't even know if there were any public comments, but Well, I didn't see any. I've checked multiple times.
Mhm.
And a challenge with some of these organizations, just like any organization, it takes time to maintain a website. So if I were to go to their website like right now and read it, it's 2022 Group B report and committee action now available. So they have some of that information that they're talking through, but they also say that open for public comment. So there's some updates that are needed. So what I figure is that it may not show up here first because the pain in the butt is it requires resources to keep websites up to date, and people are out doing work and they're getting the work done. They don't always have time, and people don't always want to pay extra fees to have someone manage this. So our next step basically is waiting to hear word that it was adopted along with a set of other proposals where there are no questions. So we're on track for that. We should hear that announcement any day.
Yeah, I think they said on like middle of September, so that's any day now. So what's that going to mean? Like, I'm assuming you're going to get that final determination. What's that going to mean for the industry? What's it going to mean for the US Hba? What's it going to mean for, everybody?
So what it means is going to send a signal to the industry that the market for industrial hemp, in particular related to building, is going to accelerate. It's going to present opportunities. So some will see it in advance because they've already been looking into the material. Others are going to learn about it the first time when they see the announcement because they follow changes with code. And then you'll have building departments that will be interested in knowing, what does it mean? There'll be a lot of people who have no idea what it means. So it's going to shift the landscape and provide a solid foundation on which to go forward.
Okay.
I say it that way because when I came on board, we'd already finished the hemp lime retrofit. So we were the first retrofit in New York. And the model is different than most typical ways that people think about hempcrete homes, because typically it's a brand new structure and it's a bit more on the expensive side because it's a luxury kind of for some people. And we realize that a majority of homes are built. So, 99% of homes are built. There might be like 700,000 to 1.1 million new homes built each year. Now, with that said, the idea in our mind was that we need a solution that applies to existing structures so that we can make them provide better insulation and provide some opportunity to control moisture with the intent of reducing the risk of mold.
Okay.
That's what's on the table right now. Now, it's a very good question because the second part of that is the one I'm most excited about. Here's what I mean. We have an opportunity to rebuild manufacturing in the United States by following a couple of key steps that we're prototyping in New York. As you know, as I mentioned before, the reason we built this house, or did this retrofit, is to prove that it could be done and not talk, just do it. And then when a person starts saying things, it's like, would you like to see the completed work? Do you have any questions? Would you like to know how it feels to live in the house? Would you like to see me throw some water on the wall and see it disappear? All kinds of things. And that quickly deals with people's imaginations of the things that can happen, because unfortunately people speculate and our minds tend to go toward the negative. And then we inadvertently find ourselves, 80-20 rule, spending a majority of our time giving the best descriptions of the problems and trying to remember every horror story that can come to mind. And then we feel like we accomplished something. The thing for me is that I'm so far beyond that. It's like, I don't even want to think about that. It's like, we're into positive stuff. But the idea is staying with a positive mindset and doing what's possible. And so with that, what's next is there are going to be hemp mills in almost every state. There are going to be maker spaces where people come together and exchange skills, where you talk about, well, okay, the fiber's coming off the line and it's a little difficult to work with. What do we do? It's a scientific process. Do you plant it closer together? So now you got to talk with farmers. We're talking about collaboration. Do you use chemicals or something else to reduce the tensile strength? All these different possibilities of what can be done. We don't have to speculate. Just test it and try it and then see if it's repeatable. And the scientific method will tell us what is best as long as we're honest with the data. And so every state has that opportunity. So in my role as president, is to continue to tell people we want to work with you. So for industry, what would be incredibly helpful is if we can get this message that we're talking about right now to professional corporations that build building products. Because I've listened to other interviews and people talk about competing. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? It's like the construction industry is so huge. They're looking for solutions. And people working in their garage are not a threat, right? It's a long cycle for you to go from a garage into a corporation. And it takes a lot of process. It takes money. It takes experience. So I respect that because I've worked for startups and I've worked for big corporations. Now, my preference, which is what I'll be negotiating with the membership this month, is to focus on what can we accomplish in each state with local industry. So we need to have some conversations because the idea is that if you are in PA and you're close to Limeworks, and Limeworks is a provider of custom hemp lime mix that you can use in your hempcrete and get it right every time, why not work out a deal with them if you're in the PA area to figure out distribution? Now, if you have other lime source areas and other plants that are idle and you see the market growing, it basically says, well, does it make sense to go to that corporation and do an analysis with your county legislators and your executives to figure out for those vacant buildings that are underutilized, do we want to look at what it would take to assign some tax dollars? In other words, you have to reduce the risk for some people, not to give away abatements to some companies come in and want to build houses and get out, but who want to really invest in the community to bring those places back to life. And then you can also see how for farmers, there's a hidden benefit that people have not even begun to imagine about. And that's the regenerative nature of hemp as a plant. The cannabis plant is regenerative. And when farmers learn that, what they can do is decide when to include it in a crop rotation. Because some people might be thinking, oh, we're going to cut down the forest and plant hemp. No, that's not the formula.
No, leave the forests.
Yes,
please
leave
leave the forests.
Yeah, talk to the farmers. They've got land. They have crops that they're growing. Prove it out, test it out.
Right. So once the ICC determination goes through, does that mean like local municipalities like then have to approve it, or is just like hemp ready to go as a building material across the board?
Good question. So the way building code works is that it's fascinating because it goes back to the formation of our nation. We're back basically a set of separate states that have states' rights, and they enter into a constitutional agreement with the federal government in terms of what are the rules for our mutual benefit, like defense. Now, when it comes to issues like farming, what had been told me by a policy analyst while I was at the Hershey PA event with the commissioners was that PA, for example, doesn't follow the Farm Bill, which is an interesting thought. I never realized that. I heard that this year. I never heard that before. So given that idea, it starts to cause you to think, okay, I think I see the landscape a little differently now. There's a lot of freedom in this country. Now, keep in mind, there's freedom to do foolishness or there's freedom to do the people's work. Now, with that said, you can start to see, take a state, I'll take New York. Then you take cities, like major cities will have enough infrastructure and tax revenue to support a building department because those people have to get paid because they're trying to maintain fines, databases, records, and all that. And they're looking to send a crew out to look at houses and properties to make sure they're structurally safe from a number of dimensions, typically starting with structural, electrical, and plumbing because they tend to cause greater damage. Now, once you see it that way, you can start imagining how do they respond to some change in the building code. It's something that they have to agree to for most of them.
Okay.
Some of them, they'll say, we don't have time for all that. We're just going to accept what is in the code, right? And then when you're building, we're going to evaluate you against that, but we will figure out how to evaluate you. Oh, look, some new material, appendix AY. We don't know what to do, right? So that's what we're heading into, but that's true for all materials. So to get ahead of that, our intent is to focus on a coast-to-coast, border-to-border, every island and territory approach that when I presented it to the board in the beginning of the year, I said, you know what? I said, we need a moon landing mission. And it's like, oh, what do you mean? I said, well, okay, for some of the younger folks, maybe folks hadn't seen the moon landing, right? But it was an epic project in America. Well, you might remember some of that because I remember being in a park watching it landing.
Well, I wasn't alive yet, but yeah, I do. I've heard about it.
Yeah, I'm in my 60s, so I remember being at a park, right? People are picnicking and standing around black and white television with like rabbit ears. Like, oh look, it's coming down, it's landing. It was captivating. It captured everyone's imagination.
Yeah.
Now, of course, everyone's not going to be as excited about hemp because there's not a lot to see, right? But at least people who look at it can start to appreciate the value for communities. So in a local community, what we're doing is we're demonstrating a model in order to show people how you will benefit from this and how we have been able to achieve success by collaborating with our legislators. So for example, Donna Lapardo, she's the chair of the Agriculture Committee. Senator Hinchy, she's chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee. Tim Sweeney, he reports into the commissioner's office, Commissioner Ball. He's the commissioner of Ag and Markets for the state of New York. Now, if you just take that group of people alone, the fact that I was able to get through to them and build a relationship with them, a working relationship, what that's turned into is trust. So in other words, early in the year, when we gave presentations during the statewide working group call, I would share information with them like Liberate Hemp, Buy Now, Hemp Exemption. So they were able to take that and use that as support for legislation, which they just got approved and signed into New York law in June. I think it was on June 8th. So that gives a model for how you create the legislation. But what's interesting is that there's a second part to it. That first part, they got support. That was more legislative. The next part, work in the field, work in the community, that has more to do with appropriation. So for appropriations, we're all learning civics over again, right? So for appropriations, the idea is that's more on the executive branch to the governance budget. So the trick for every state, okay, I just realized, every state is going to want to know this part. So we're going to slow down just a little bit. In every state, the opportunity, once you've built relationship with the individuals just mentioned, is to support their legislation through a consensus process so that they have the mandate and the authority to write it and defend it on the floor. They live in a different world than us. They're legislators. And then the executive branch, they live in a world where there are silos. They're not supposed to go over here or dip over there. That's why if a person doesn't know that, an individual could get frustrated if they call and say, hey, this is really important. They give a great presentation. Then they expect it's going to get done. And what you'll hear is like, thank you. It's like, what do you mean? I thought the response to an amazing message was, the money is going to be transferred tomorrow. No, there's another step. And the step is consensus building. Because guess what? We live in a democracy. And then the epiphany is like, oh, that's right. And guess what? Legislators don't have time for all that. And neither does the executive branch. They don't even have hardly a budget for that. So it's really up to the people. And so you can see there's like this strange kind of challenge that we're all up against.
Right.
It's folks with money who unfortunately are driving the narrative, right? But the people have a different agenda. They quite often are concerned about the street they live on, how the kids are doing, the school, right? Education,
right.
The library, the pool, the basketball, all that kind of just regular stuff for what you do when you wake up in the morning and go to bed. You want food, you want clean water, you want clean air, all those things. That's people work. It's typically not going to come from big organizations, corporations, because they already told us. What they said is our duty is to the shareholders. Think about what that means. I have no obligation to the community. My duty is to the shareholders. If you look at most corporations, their top objective is to the shareholders, period.
Yeah. And it's that like drive for short-term profits that has left our world in just, in a disgraceful state. And so like I approach this like we're on the edge of a paradigm shift where we have to value something besides money and short-term profits. We have to get back to valuing each other and the land that we have. We've got just one place to live, and
Yep.
we've screwed it up in such a short amount of time.
People are going to have an Easter Island experience. And so for those who don't remember Easter Island, that's the story of a group of people finding an island someplace and thinking, oh, great, look at all these trees, look at all these animals and birds and fish, and let's start making canoes, right? And then you go at it, and for, I don't know how long, 10 years, whatever, then you start getting to a point where the scientists and the spiritual people say, we have a problem. It seems some of the birds are dying, the animals are getting low, and it seems like there are fewer trees. We haven't counted them, but it just kind of sensed at another period of time, and then people making money or what have you, or people not paying attention, you get to a tipping point, and then you go down the slippery slope, which means you can't stop. As much as you claw and scratch, you can't stop. It's over, right? Now, people say save the planet. Baloney. The planet is going to be here. It's people who are going to inflict off.
Save ourselves. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So the idea is education. We have to get the word out, and that's what our plan is. So as president, I'm working through some details so that it's clear to everyone, where we're going next and why.
Let's change gears a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a couple of months ago now, we had a guest on who was sort of poking holes in some things. He was talking about legitimization of the hemp industry, and he said that, in order for hemp to sort of compete with other building materials, it's got to meet certain criteria. And he talked about this $600 R value test. He's like, why doesn't the hempcrete, why don't they just do this $600 test and prove its R value? And he also talked about how hempcrete is defying the laws of thermodynamics, or the way the industry talks about it. It seems to defy the laws of thermodynamics. And that's like above my head. I'm a writer, journalist, musician, not a scientist, So can you weigh in on any of those things?
So as part of my engineering training at San Jose State University, public university, have a wonderful engineering program. I took a couple of classes in thermodynamics and material science, which were absolutely fascinating. So when you talk, and also the area of physics and chemistry. So whenever you talk about ideas like thermodynamics, it has to do with materials. It has to do with other variables like pressure, temperature, the type of material and the transfer rates, and openness is a term that's used to define how fast vapor can be absorbed or released. So all those things are considered. Now, to simplify it, I did listen to the interview that you were talking about, and I'll be honest with you, some of the ideas didn't quite line up with my understanding. So when I think of the idea of insulation and thermal mass, depends on how a person wants to think about it. You can maybe argue an angle, but I don't see the point of it. Here's why. The walls in this house are insulated with hemp, lime as a mixture. What that does, it forms what some people might refer to as a matrix. Now, within that matrix, you've got the herd fibers that have a certain amount of air inside of them. Air is what provides the insulative properties because it has the lowest transfer rate of a majority of the materials that we tend to work with. And so that's why insulation, the intent is to trap air and then reduce the convection currents within that trapped air so it doesn't transfer it by cooling off the molecules that then bump against the side that you're trying to keep warm and cool. It's complex. It gets into those details. Now, separate from that, this idea of trapping air, you can have air and mass within a material. So maybe what the individual's overlooking is the natural aspects of the material, that it's not one uniform thing. So if you just take the concept, let's do a thought exercise. Let's say you take a material like some type of a lime binder. A lime binder, concrete, aggregate, etc. As you head in those directions, those kinds of materials are oftentimes referred to as having a thermal mass. And that has to do with the rate at which they absorb and release thermal energy. So the thermal energy is the idea of molecular movement within the material. Now, if we agree that the material lime, that lime mixture, has thermal mass associated with it, and it's in a matrix along with material that has air pockets, is it not true that it's both insulative and has thermal characteristics. And so that actually shows up in the building code that was approved. There are tests that have been done, ASTM tests that have been done, fire tests that have been done. It's in the proposal. So if the person who said these things to you, if they would read that proposal, it would answer majority of their questions, but they will have more questions like what you just mentioned, the idea of how do you have insulation and thermal mass? Now, we could slice it a different way. Let's say, for example, you had a wall that was already in place, like a brick wall. It has thermal mass. It has certain characteristics because it doesn't have as good an insulation because the thermal characteristics of it tend to dominate the insulative characteristics. Now, if you put hemp lime on the outside, now you're adding an insulating layer. So now all of a sudden you have thermal mass and insulation. Now, within the code itself, the way insulation is discussed is based on density. So there's a sample test case where what you do with your building department is you take a uniform sample of a certain size and mix, right? A couple of them, you take them to a lab if needed and have them tested if your building department wants to see that. Now, if you can imagine this, kind of like we talked about earlier, if you have a test where the results show no appreciable difference, why do you keep doing it? Because you're wasting money and time. So someone will do it first in a state. That inspector will come out and they'll look at your test results and say, oh, okay, this insulation is fine. Now, in other cases, they'll look at it and they'll say, in other words, they're smart enough to know we're wasting time going down this path. It seems you know what you're talking about. I look forward to it being done. I want to see what it looks like. See, then the conversation shifts. It's like, I know you want high insulation, so who am I to come and measure your walls and say, oh, I want 8R or 16R or 20R on your walls. So there are ways of dealing with that.
All right, that's Henry Gage Jr., the new president at the Us Hemp Building Association. Now we're going to talk to his new vice president, Ryan Doherty. Ryan Doherty, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you, Eric. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so you are the newly appointed vice president of the Us Hemp Building Association, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But first, congratulations on that. And I wonder if you could sort of give us an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, my name is Ryan Doherty. I'm the vice president of the Us Hemp Building Association and the CEO of Hemp Ventures. And I've been in and around hemp fiber processing for most of my professional life. Got very lucky in the timing of going to school in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia and got to work on the hemp research crop trial programs through my university, and then got a group of guys interested in fiber hemp and processing before I even left university, and allowed me to travel through Europe and other parts of the world and see supply chains, producing things like bat fiber insulation, building products of all different sorts and other animal products and things. So got to see a complete hemp industry kind of before one even existed here. And things been kind of slow moving, but back in the States, had the opportunity to work at a large outfit in Kentucky that grew several thousands of acres of hemp and took things from crop to shop. So again, got to see more of the supply chain and some of the hurdles. And since then have been working on both ends of the supply chain, kind of the very front end of the machines and the processing that goes into turning the fiber into a finished good, and then also developing finished goods and working on branding and marketing and getting the word out there about the herd and the other types of hemp products. And that is my main focus, but really have a particular focus on the building space and making our built environment less toxic and more sustainable. I have my own dreams of living in a hemp home here soon, and would like everyone else that shares those dreams to be able to conceive them and produce the materials here and domestically to make that possible.
All right.
And
amen to that. Yeah.
That's my work at the moment.
Cool. So it sounds like a perfect fit for the U.S. Hemp Building Association. Before we get to that, tell me a little bit about Hemp Ventures.
Yeah, Hemp Ventures, like I said, previously worked at the Virginia Hemp Company and then Sunstrand, and all throughout that looking for partners and people in the space pioneering and innovating, and linked up with a gentleman named John Lupian, who is a guru of the fibers and been in the hemp space for as long as anybody. And he is who I run Hemp Ventures with, and we've worked on a number of different projects and innovations on the end product side, producing branded products, doing a lot of third-party testing and our own testing to verify the performance of hemp fiber and herd applications and products. And then the last year and a half, really deep diving and focusing on the infrastructure and build outs of these fiber processing, or often referred to as decortication systems. We mainly focus on mechanical separation of the plant, not really using any chemical processes in our fiber procedures or processing systems that we're putting out there or working on. But that is kind of a down value added step that can be done. We prefer to do it once the fiber and herd's been separated, which makes that initial processing step still necessary to separate and really clean the fiber from the herd. And that's something that's really lacking here in the United States, is that infrastructure as a whole. There's capacity for market demand potential to produce, or have the need for capacity for a lot more processing of the fiber stock than there is currently. And one of the things that a lot of people are looking at is, what technology should we implement? And that's kind of a hard question to come to the right answer on. So we're trying to create more domestic options for people and ourselves.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about the Us Hemp Building Association. You are the newly appointed vice president. What does your new role look like? What are you up to over there?
Yeah, well, I will be supporting Mr. Henry Gage. He is the newly appointed president, and we are kind of in a new phase of the US Hba, as it was originally created with the intentions of helping the hemp building industry as a whole, and getting the International Construction Council to approve a hemp lime building code proposal. And that proposal was RB 316-22, and that's what the US Hba had been working on for years previously, and this especially last year, as it got put in front of the ICC. And now that that's going through, it's got a series of, it's open for comments, and then it goes into another review, and it is like a multi-year process to get that in. But it will be very big help for builders all across the world, I believe, especially here in the United States, for getting that stamp of approval and helping smooth over processes like insurance and other regulations and rigorous areas to build, like California and such, that have had issues with that in particular. And then outside of that, my role previously, or title, was the supply chain director, and still very involved there. My kind of main interest and hope to show the members and the building industry as a whole is that the supply chain is growing, and to help continue to grow it. So we're going to kind of change our supply chain meeting and more to a supply chain collaborative build up, and have people that have materials and ideas for those materials connect with builders and innovators that want to take those materials and turn them into something, and start to link that supply chain up some more. We do still have on the US Hba website, and continuing to grow that out, the map of the supply chain here in the United States, where you can source things like lime and building materials, or people making ready-made building products like Hempatexture, producing the hemp wool up in Idaho. I'm all over the place. And that is one of many companies that's producing ready-made hemp building, or hemp or natural material building materials. And so that's one side of it. And the other side is showing those finished products and those finished buildings in action in the market and in the United States so far. And so we have a map of all the US hemp builds, and would love to keep adding that. And we do have, that's open to anybody who constructs something with or out of hemp. Please submit. There's a way to submit there on the ushba.org site under the resources tab. And then the supply chain map is at the moment for members, so kind of an inspiration to be a part of the membership and be able to market your services. But I know lots of people connect in their regions with the local builders and material suppliers, and trying to make this a regional building model where hopefully we can have these products being produced not only domestically, but in parts of the country, all over the country.
Right. That's awesome. And now I'm asking you here to like look into your crystal ball. When will there be, enough supply of domestically grown hemp, to meet the demands of the potential markets?
Sure. I think with hemp particularly, I mean, it's been a chicken and egg situation for so long that, the supply will create the demand, unfortunately. Like any usable material, wood, just being out on the market, people figured out how to build furniture and houses and everything else we build out of wood. If it was a very limited resource and not much of it available and all that, we wouldn't have ever figured out how to build. Here in Germany, they're famous for building stone houses. I wouldn't say famous, but that's their building style. They're famous for it. But and here we're very well known for building with wood, and it's because we have lots of wood. They have lots of stone, or they don't have lots of wood. But once we have more hemp available, there will continue to be especially more precast or pre-made building products. I don't feel that cast on site lends itself to having a huge demand potential, just because every building group has a limited bandwidth. They can probably do 2 to 3 projects maximum a year, and they're pretty on the more luxury custom side.
Are you putting spray applied into that category too?
No, I'd say that's just for the precast on site. The spray applied hasn't really taken off like wildfire yet. Very limited by the amount of spray systems out there. And I think that's definitely increasing as we see a domestic supply of those spray systems available. And I think that's going to be huge for new builds, but especially for renovations, which we've seen several of, which is, a way less expensive. And they have like some stat, it's a really great one, like 99% of all the buildings out there have already been built or something this year. I don't know. It's like most of the buildings in existence obviously are already there, so it's a much better market to go after renovating old homes than trying to build from scratch. And so that, I think the spray system will be huge. I'm not as haven't had the experience of being on a site for one of those projects, but they seem to go by much quicker, and it's a much more effective model for being able to get several projects done or more projects done. So it's just hard to judge. I had the very awesome opportunity of supplying hemp builds back in 2018 through Kentucky Hemp, and we used to get just people all the time who needed either maybe 1 million pounds or maybe none, or maybe just 12,000 for this one build, or but it's very hard to housing is a very tough one to speculate on, and projects are always coming up and falling through, and so it is tough. And it's one thing I advocate through the Us Hba and the supply chain work, is looking for processors to make heard for the building industry, because it's kind of hard to sell people on, because it's not like bedding or an absorbent market where it's very, very consistent. Building is more unreliable as far as being a market. That's why I think these precast products and bricks and things like that will create more consistency and less price fluctuation, and give people an easier way to kind of forecast. A lot of people who want to build big with hemp, put up neighborhoods and such, they need a product like that, or a system of building that's more easy to forecast than just a weight of herd and a weight of lime, and that you're all going to mix it on site. It's pretty hard to
that's a big ask. You're based in Colorado. Do you get out east much?
Yeah, I grew up mostly
you're in Virginia.
Up in Northern Virginia. That's where my hemp career was inspired through the works of our forefathers, and seeing pictures of lovely hemp fields. I'd love to bring it back.
The reason I ask, you were talking about like the retrofit, and I'm thinking about the Project PA Hemp Home that they've done in Western Pennsylvania. Have you been there?
I've not been up. I know the group is Dawn, I believe. Yeah.
Dawn Services. Yep.
Dawn they have plans to bring fiber processing infrastructure and supply chain. I think that's all awesome, and a great place to be doing it. Very productive corner of the country agriculturally, and a place with lots of old homes. And no, I haven't been up there myself personally, but that looks like an amazing possible supply chain.
Yeah, like proof of concept. Like, look, you can do this. We could, retrofit all of the houses in the Northeast, and make them
Exactly.
energy efficient and healthy and,
Yeah.
mold resistant. And
I think that's probably one of the biggest keys is model homes. And that's kind of one of the alluring and I think people don't get to see as much as the experience of being inside of a hemp house and feeling
it changes
the temperature control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So we
can
need
feel
more
the difference.
examples or public structures so that people can get in there and feel it. And I just, you see such a movement with organic clothing and food and people wanting to put less harmful and toxic things in their bodies. And you just think about how much time you spend inside your house and you sleep there every night. And I think it'll become a much more sensible thing. It's just a hard thing to switch, just like the construction industry and building techniques are a hard thing to switch. It takes a lot of shift from the people to encourage that.
It's like trying to turn a aircraft carrier around, right? It's a slow process.
Oh, I come from a family of sailors. We love a good boat reference, and it is exactly like that.
I like the cut of your jib. Yeah.
Very nice.
Getting back to Us Hba, other initiatives you're working on there, or other things folks should know about?
We are looking at how to empower our members more to host local meetings, and that's something. So I will be working with our other marketing and board members to put together ways so if people have interest in hosting and educating local builders and architects about building with hemp. You don't feel like you have all enough resources of the presentation or the materials. We are putting together a plan of action to empower the people to go present. And I want everyone booking middle seat on planes so they can tell two people about building with hemp in America. It should be like that. So we'll get there.
I did some traveling this year. I went to Denver a couple times and once to Montana. And I had the middle seat every time.
Heck yeah.
And I told the people.
That's what it's about.
Did my job, right?
I like that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of telling people stuff, you have a new educational initiative that I believe is a podcast, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I partnered up with a gentleman on the East Coast from the Northeast named Matthew Soares. He has a hemp clothing company called Yesterday. And he is just a hemp advocate, been talking and doing hemp news and updates in the hemp space for a while now. And we partnered together and started kind of a marketing initiative and educational campaign called Have You Heard, HURD, homonym for the inner woody core of the hemp plant and to hear some information. And so we are really trying to focus a little bit more. My partner, John Lupian, spent a big part of his life. He was a history professor or student and got his master's from Pepperdine in history and focused for several years on the backstory of why hemp is where it is and why it became illegal. And the story is still, we believe, untold. It's true form and fashion as it could be. And there's even some stories out there, very well-known ones, like The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which is the title is based on a Japanese story, which is a great one. If people don't know the story about the young boy who the naked emperor and all that stuff, if you got time, check into that. But that is it does have some misconceptions in it.
Okay, that's really fascinating. And when is that going to be published, or are you just teasing us?
No, we're just teasing. That's what we'll be talking about, things like that in the podcast. Okay. But we have an itch in John to trying to get him to go back to put that book together for quite some time. He's got John Lupian has one of the most interesting stories in the hemp space. Been worked on companies like Bass Labs and Bass Core and several other projects. But one of them a long time ago was for the D'Angelo brothers writing a book about the history of hemp. And he's got troves of information and he can tell you stories about hemp for days. So when me and John get together, we dig a giant hole and we hang out in the rabbit tunnels and we talk about hemp and some other topics. But cool. That is what we'll be covering, things like that. And then also covering, we have our first episode out there already, kind of just informational background. And we'll be doing like 2 or 3 episodes in every month or so, putting out a hemp industry update. Will be our more Matthew Soares does that kind of updates and he's big in the cannabis space as a whole. So just trying to get the word out there to a larger crowd. And also I'm just astonished, kind of disappointed every day I run into people who don't know what hurt is. And so that's the kicker of the campaign. We got stickers made. I'm gonna be out here in Boulder, Colorado, making sure everybody is not only a hemp advocate, but they know what hurt is. And,
I feel like everybody in Boulder already knows what hemp is, right?
And they know what hemp is, but
they don't know about the herd.
They think sometimes, you wouldn't believe this, Eric. They think sometimes, I tell them hemp, they think it's the male cannabis plant. Like they're like, oh, that's the male one, right? Like,
I've heard that before.
What in the
like
good green earth?
That doesn't make sense.
No. Huh. So we're working on that.
Cool. So the podcast is called Have You Heard? HURD.
And it's on the socials at Have You Heard Podcast.
Okay. And it's on all the platforms, like people listening to this show on their, Spotify app. They could easily just scroll over and check you guys out.
Yes, sir. It's on Spotify, Apple.
And notice I am not threatened by competition here because we need more podcasts about hemp.
I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, I welcome you guys back to the space. You said your partner has been doing a podcast before, but this is a new initiative specifically about herd. Cool.
Specifically, and hemp fiber applications mainly. But we're going to talk, the next talk we're going to do is about genetics and how that plays into, what you're targeting and what people are doing to optimize the, future of hemp genetics here in the United States. But there's just so many directions, and so many different podcasts covering so much. We're going to try to kind of keep it really on the big, tall hemp that makes the fiber and grain.
Right on. Yeah, that's the kind of hemp I like. Actually, I like it all. But for the vision that I have of the world, we need, industrial hemp grown at massive scales. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, sir. I just thought of like if you needed like another clever title for your podcast, maybe herd mentality might also.
I like that.
Once we get more people in, right?
And I love the word. The herd is a triple homonym.
Yeah.
It's got herd innerwoody core. It's got herd. I heard something good, and it's a herd of hemp people. Like HERD, HURD, HEARD.
So many possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah. I could go on about homonyms for a little bit. Honestly, I won't do that.
I think you were the first person ever on this show to use the word homonym. So thank you for that.
There's one word that I'm actually trying to eliminate from the English language, which is morning. Because everybody, when I'm on the trail hiking around, everybody looks at me. They're like, "Morning." I'm like, "No, I'm not. Are you?" And they're like, "What'd you just say?" Yeah, because that one's really strong. I think words are magical. They hold power. They carry weight. I can crush people with my words alone. It's usually like heavy truth that really gets them. But no, that is morning. I'm getting rid of that. I got an initiative after him, but I'll work on that later.
Interesting.
Yes, sir.
That took a turn. Cool. Well, hey, Ryan, it's great to talk to you. I'm excited about all that you're doing with the podcast and with Hemp Ventures and with your new position at the Us Hemp Building Association. So thank you for doing what you do in the world.
Appreciate it very much. You as well, sir. Happy to join anytime and discuss. And we'll keep making America greener, covered in emerald fields of hemp. And if I can do anything, I'll stop everybody from waking and morning every day. I'm changing the language.
Awesome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
All right, there you go. The new leadership team at the US Hemp Building Association. Very interesting stuff. So anyway, that does it for me today. I got to get out of here. It's Friday. I'm up against the clock. So anyway, my name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. If you have questions or comments for me, please get in touch. Send me an email. You can send it right to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. And be sure to check out the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com to click on all the links, the news links, the links we talked about in the episodes, all that stuff. And if you're unfamiliar with the US Hemp Building Association, by all means, go to ushba.org. Check them out, become a member. They're doing fantastic work in this world. All right, until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp
Season 2, Episode 34 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written, recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.